Hello and welcome to the next episode in the series whereby we take some technology that's been added to the very latest motorbikes of 2024 and 25 and add them to our older generation motorbikes. Now, as you can see, this is a GS from a much older generation. This particular one is a 2010. So what you're about to see today is going to cover the bikes from the early generations, the oil coupe bikes. So that's 2004 to 2012 for the GS and 2006 to 2013 for the GSA. So this product, the complete kit, is a collaboration between two companies, and that is INNOVV and Weiser-Technik. If you want to know more, I have covered it in quite a lot more detail in this video up here, and I will put a link to it at the end of this video so you can find out more about the collaboration. But in effect, what we're doing here, we're taking INNOVV's absolutely brilliant blind spot detection system with inbuilt collision warning, and we're combining it with an installation kit that comes from Weisertechnik, which includes a pair of brand new OEM R1300GS and GSA mirrors with that inbuilt blind spot detection LED, and then we're going to replace these on this earlier generation bike, install the kit so that we have a collision warning system and a blind spot detection system. And as you're about to see, it is really very easy to do, and we have got a way to add a bit of important technology and a bit of a safety feature to our older generation bikes. So let's get straight on with the video. Let me show you first of all the tools that you're going to need to have ready in advance, and then I'll take you through step by step the full installation from start to finish. Let's get started. So what you see here are the tools that we're going to use during the installation. So we've got a ratchet screwdriver with a TX25 bit and a TX30 bit. I've got a 3/8 ratchet. I've got a socket with a 6mm Allen key on there, a 14mm spanner for undoing the mirrors, a 10mm spanner for undoing the negative terminal on the battery, a pair of side cutters, a pair of wire strippers, and a pair of crimpers. I'll explain why we're having these in this video in a moment. And then of course a heat gun. Now the heat gun isn't strictly necessary. You can get away with using a hairdryer, and when we come to that section I'll explain more. So these are the basic tools that I've used. Now in addition to this, there are some additional parts that are not included in the kit that I've had to supply. I did use considerably more cable ties. I also, because of the way I'm doing the installation in terms of the connection to the bike, I used a ring terminal, one of these, which is why we've got the crimpers. If you're using the Denali Smart Can or the Hex Easy Can system, you're obviously not going to need this or this tool. And then in addition, I've used cloth tape. It's also called gaffer tape or tank tape. And then the last thing really are several pieces of cardboard to keep our bolts in order. So now you know what we need to use. The Loctite, by the way, the 243, this is only because for this installation I'm using one of the bolts that comes in the INNOVV kit, and I'm mounting that into a plastic housing, so I want to keep that bolt secure, so I've used some Loctite. But let me show you what we need to do. So I just want to talk briefly about the contents of the INNOVV box. Now the packaging itself is very good. Inside you will find some very well written and detailed instructions, and it's important that you read these and you understand what the manufacturer wants us to do in terms of installation. But what we'll end up with are three main items inside the pack. There is the main wiring harness, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. There's an installation pack. We're going to use part of this kit to install the radar and mount everything. We've got our self-adhesive sticky pads, and we've got over here our main radar unit. Now the radar unit does in fact have a protective film on the outside. We need to remove that once we've finished the installation. But I just wanted to talk briefly about the module itself. Now it's actually really very simple. We've only got a handful of wires. So over here on the right hand side we have our two cables with BMW connectors that are just going to connect straight forward to our BMW mirrors. The cables are more than long enough to route them very neatly across the bike, and when we turn this unit over they are clearly marked left and right mirror, so you can't get them wrong and you don't have to guess. It's written on the back of this unit. And then this center large thick cable, well, that obviously is going to connect to the radar unit. Again, it's got a locking mechanism so that we can't get it connected in the wrong place. But I just really wanted to talk about these two wires here. Now, obviously red and black, that indicates that we need a positive feed and we need a ground. But once you've read the instructions, it is really clear that we cannot and we must not connect these cables direct to the battery. The system will work, but we will flatten our battery in a couple of days, so we do need to find a switched 12-volt feed from some area, some system on the motorbike, so that the system from INNOVV becomes live only with the ignition being turned on. So let me reposition the camera and show you a couple of locations. So now you've seen all the tools and the equipment that we need to complete the process, a couple of things to highlight before we go on. Now, this video is meant as a guide, as an assistance to the manufacturer's instructions. So with regards to that kit that comes from INNOVV, I highly recommend you read their instructions. They're well written, they're very detailed, and there's a lot of information in there that you really do need to understand in terms of the positioning of the radar on the rear and the connectivity of their system to the motorbike. So I would really highly recommend that you read the manufacturer's instructions first and then use this video as a guide to assist you during the installation process. So the first part that we need to remove is this plastic assembly on the back of the bike. Now it's only held on with 3 bolts. They're TX30, they're very easy to take off. We've got one here, we've got one in exactly the opposite side of the bike over on this side, on the left hand side, and then we've got one down here, this one here in the center. And this is where we're going to use our very first piece of cardboard. And one other tip that you can do is write the number of the stage that you're working on, so that when you come to reassemble everything, you just assemble everything back in the reverse order. So I've written number 1 and I've got 3 holes ready for these screws, or rather these bolts. So I'll take these off, I'll speed this up, and then we'll move on to the next section. So before we proceed to remove this plastic panel here, there is one more important thing to do, is when we took off this top carrier mount, there are in fact these little spacers that sit on the side, and if I lift one out with my finger, we've got one on the right and we've got one over here on the left hand side. So what I suggest you do is put those in your cardboard with your bolts so that we can't lose them for later on. So this plastic housing, this is retained by 8 bolts. Now there is one additional bolt that we're only going to undo. We're not going to remove it because that will make it easier for disassembly. We are going to need our TX30, and we're also going to need an Allen key. Now this is a 6mm Allen key, and that is to undo these on the side, these mounting points, because we need to remove those to get to one hidden bolt behind here. So again, I'll speed this up, but in essence what we have is 1, 2 TX30, 3, 4 TX30. These ones that are slightly hidden behind here, TX30, 5, 6. We need to remove these, which are the 6mm Allen, that's 7, 8. And then there is one more screw, which I'm going to show you a close-up in a minute. We're just going to undo it. We're not going to remove it. And then this panel easily removes. And then that is the preparation for the rear of the bike done. Just bear in mind that on the side here, these are plastic and they have a little bit of movement, and we can pull both of them outwards to help lift this up. But let me reposition the camera and show you the one other screw that we're just going to loosen. So now we're looking at the front left-hand side where the key goes into the lock at the front of the bike. And there is in fact this one bolt here. This is a different size. This is the TX25. And what we need to do is we need to undo this probably 3 turns, just like that, just enough to get it loose so that we can slide. And if I'm careful, you'll see the mechanism unhinge from that point on there under that bolt. And then all we need to do is very carefully lift these panels out on the side, like so, left and right, and then we can just carefully lift this whole assembly completely off the bike. Now just one thing to bear in mind, these rubbers, these ones here, do sometimes fall off, and one has fallen off on the floor already. So when you go to put these back on, if I move that around, they look like this and they actually clip into here and they rest on the mechanism on the side. So let's move on. So we are progressing really quickly. The next section, we're looking at the front right hand side of the bike. We need to remove this section here, and it is incredibly easy. You don't need to worry. We've just got 1, 2 and a 3rd bolt up here. They are TX25, and then this whole panel will remove. So I'll speed this bit up, but it is really very, very straightforward. So with those 3 TX25 bolts removed, this panel very, very easily comes off. Now all we need to do is we're going to pull it gently towards it, rotate it, and then it will lift on. It's actually held on with a couple of clips up here. I'll show you how they go back on, and then that just pulls straight off. Now the locating pin is this plastic plug here, and that's going to locate up here on the front. And the other thing to pay attention to is we have these 2 clips on the top, one here and one here. So I'll just refit this to show you how this goes back on. So we're going to look for our locating pin first, this one over there in the corner, rotate the panel up, push the pin in like that, and then if I'm quiet and we press with a little bit of pressure inwards, you'll hear these top 2 click into place. That's it. So then we would be ready when we're doing the reassembly to put those 3 bolts in. So let me move on and show you the last panel that we need to remove, which is this one here. So with this one, we only have 2 screws, both again TX25. So place your 2 screws in the cardboard, and then this panel just gently lifts out like so. Now you have got 2 edges up here that locate on these 2 points here. So when we do the reassembly, which I'm not going to show you because it's just going to be very, very simple, the reverse, you go in at a slight angle like so, and then it just clips into place, and then we can line this up, move it slightly left or right to put these 2 screws in. So now we've got that last panel removed, we are ready to get on with the installation. So I have very loosely remounted the plastics on the rear of the bike so that I can get some sort of indication of where I might decide to mount the radar unit from INNOVV. Now in the kit there are lots of brackets and screws and things that we can use. There are plenty of options, and I think one very obvious option would be to have the radar unit mounted down here at the bottom of the number plate. The location I think I would prefer is the number plate is held on with 1, 2, 3 bolts. I would probably order, if this was my own bike, order another number plate and then move that number plate down about 2.5 centimeters or an inch, so that then I could mount that radar unit centrally beneath the reflector and above the number plate. And I think in terms of having a stealthy, clean install, that would be the location I would want to mount it. And then I could easily, because the cables are plenty long enough, get the cables to come up and run along the top. However, what I did find when I was taking the plastic assembly off is I think that in the past, one of the previous owners has in fact had a camera system mounted to his tail unit up here. Because if we look up there, this cutout, someone has elongated that cutout with a Stanley knife, and they have cut a thread into here. And it just happens, once I checked it, if I just show you that now, that is in fact, hopefully you can see that on the camera, that is in fact the same thread that INNOVV use for one of their larger bolts. And if I screw that in quite tightly, and I show you that on the camera, that looks like it's going to be a perfect place. And if I then rest that back where it's going to be on the bike, this is actually going to be a very good location. So then what I can use, if I then turn, I can use this mounting bracket on the top, like so, and then I can mount the radar centrally underneath it. Now, again, I just want to highlight, if this was my bike, I would take this option. I would drop the number plate. I'd order a replacement number plate because I'd have to drill 3 new holes, and I would mount the radar in there. But as this is a customer bike, I think for the ease of mounting for this video, I'm going to mount it up here because clearly I would imagine that someone has had a camera mounted on the tail of their bike, and it seems logical to use the threads that have already been cut into plastic. So, as I mentioned earlier, we need to find a switched 12-volt feed to power the INNOVV system. Now, most owners with a GS, especially bikes this old, have quite probably by now been installed with a Hex EasyCan or a Denali SmartCan system. And if you have one of those on your bike, you can just use one of those 12-volt pigtails to provide the switched 12-volt feed to power the INNOVV system. But if you don't have that, any other means of having a switched feed, there is another place that we can have a look. So if we take the toolbox out the way, which just unclips like so, we are left with quite a large space under here where we can put all of our cables. So cable routing to the rear of the bike. So this is the radar module that comes from INNOVV. All we need to do is, in my case, because I know where I'm going to mount it, which is up in sort of this position up here, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like at the end, I've made sure that there is precisely 250 millimeters from the edge of here to the rear frame. So this is how much free play I have with that rear cable. And I've measured it carefully so that I now know that when I mount the radar module up here on the plastics, I've got enough room. Now, the routing of the cable is very easy. I've passed the cable underneath, as you can see here, underneath this cross brace, and then I've just laid it carefully along here. I have used a piece of cloth tape, it's also called gaffer tape or tank tape, to hold that cable in place firmly. And then all I've done is I've connected the camera, or rather the radar feed, from the module on the back of the bike to the module that's going to be mounted under here. So just one thing to point out, the module itself, as you can see, I firmly mounted it with some self-adhesive sticky pads, 3M pads that are supplied with the INNOVV kit. You just have to make sure of the depth of mounting. And what I mean by that is the upper toolbox sits into that area under here. But if I turn that over, there is a depth of about 17 millimeters that this tray, this edge of this tray, sits into this lower toolbox area. So you just need to make sure that where you mount this module, it needs to be approximately 20 millimeters below this lip here. So that's how I've mounted this particular one with the sticky pad, 20 millimeters, so that when the tray sits in there and all the cables are out the way, it fits in neat and tidily and there's no pressure on that module. And also by mounting it this way, we can then also have easy access to the visual LED indicator that's mounted on the top. So we have these two. We have the red, which is the positive, and we have the black, which is the ground. So what I've done, I've placed a ring terminal on the black cable, and then I'm going to run the black cable out of the lower toolbox. I'm going to run it along the side of the housing, along here underneath these two bars, and then connect it direct to the battery. So that's the ground. That's where I'm going to place the ground cable. Now, the red, because the INNOVV system really doesn't take a lot in terms of current, what we're going to do is I am going to use this connection here, because everyone's going to find one of these on their GS. So let me show you how we do this, because we are going to use one of these posi tap connectors that is supplied with the kit that comes in addition from Weisertechnik. So let me show you how we're going to do that. So in here, we're going to just press gently the terminal on the end, and then that connector, bear in mind, this is the auxiliary output to the DIN plug on the side. We actually want the lower cable, which is red with a green flash. Now, what we need to do is gently pull back just a little bit of that outer covering, like so. And then with the posi tap connector, and I have shown these in the videos before so you understand what they are, there is a greeny grey cap on the end, and this is the end we need to start with. And then what we'll do, we'll unscrew this end, and what we'll see inside here, there is in fact a sharp needle. It's a very sharp point. That is going to pierce a hole in that red with a green flash cable to pick up our 12 volts. And then this here, and if I turn that around, you can see there's a groove in the middle there that we're going to lay the cable through. So let me see if I can do this all in one go. We're going to take the connector, we're going to pass this part here underneath, like so, on the lower cable, which is the red with the green flash, like that. Hopefully you can see that clearly. And then with the end with the point on it, I just want to explain, we need to hold the base. So it's the base that we need to hold. We don't want that to twist, and then we're going to screw the cap in. So let me do it like this. Hopefully you can see that more clearly. And then we're just going to screw that in. I'm holding this firmly on the bottom, and then what that does, that pierces a very small hole in the cable to pick up our 12 volt feed. So that's where we're going to get our feed. Now what we then do, now we can bring in our red cable, holding the body firmly. We're going to unscrew the red cap like so, take the red cap and place it over the exposed wire like this. Then place this wire inside. Now inside here, it's a conical shape. And when we screw these two parts, this red cap and this red body, when we screw them together, it will grip this inner core firmly inside. So we just pass that down the side like so, and with a firm pressure, we just start to do that cap up. Now again, it's important what we're doing at this point, we're holding the body and we're screwing the cap because we don't want to rotate that because we've already mounted that to the cable. So one little firm press inwards, and then I'm going to rotate that cap like so, this one, and it won't quite fully close because it is trapping the cable inside, and you'll have about a millimetre, half a millimetre of gap between the two, and then you can give that a really firm tug, and that is not going to pull out. So that has now given us our 12-volt feed from a switched socket. We haven't had to cut any wires, we've just pierced a hole, and then of course I'll mount this one so that we've got our negative connected to the battery, and then all we need to do is very gently refit that into that DIN plug under there like so, and it clips into place, and then we can tidy this up under here, which I'll do in a minute once I've put the ground cable on. Cable routing for those two cables that are going to go up to those mirrors. Let me show you what I've done. So inside here, these are the two cables, which you can see, which I'm holding with my finger, that come from the module. And inside this lower toolbox area, there is in fact a cutout here for cables to enter and exit without any pressure or without any rubbing. So we can't run them directly over the top. So I've had them come around the side here, and I've left the cable ties. I haven't cut the tops off so I can show you where their location is. I've run the two cables along the side here, one cable tie, and then I'll use a screwdriver to show you I've gone underneath this cross brace here, this one. The two cables come underneath around the rear of the shock absorber, and what we need to make sure is that these cables lay under here, and I've used a second cable tie at this point to keep those cables tight to the outside of that lower toolbox case. And then this is the other one that I haven't cut. And then from here, both cables, and you I might not be able to show you that. I'll move the camera so you can have a look. I've gone underneath this cross brace and then along the right-hand side of the battery up the side of the fuel tank. So let me move the camera so you can see where the rest of the cables go. So now we're looking at the right-hand side of the bike. Let me just show you some more with regards to the cable routing. So we came along the right-hand side of the battery here. I've used an additional cable tie. This particular bike has had a suspension upgrade, so these are the fluid pipes, and I have cable tied it once here and twice here, but you could in fact stay with the frame if you wanted to. And then what I've then done, I've followed up this breather tube. I'll lift that out the way. These are the two cables that are coming underneath, and then I've used a piece of cloth tape to keep it firm against the fuel tank, and then I've gone diagonally up here, and then these are the two cables which exit up near the headstock. Now even at this point we've still got a good half a metre of cables which we're going to use, and we can tidy the top up when we've finished. But this part I can now cut the tops off the cable ties because you've now seen where they're located, and we can move on to the next part. So on our plastic rack on the back, as I showed you earlier on, it's pretty clear to me that someone has utilised this hole at the bottom here for possibly a camera system in the past. And it looks like the thread has been used, and they've probably used an INNOVV K5 as their camera. So it is actually already threaded. So I'm going to utilise this same thread with the kit, with the parts that come with the INNOVV kit. Now to secure this in place, what I'm going to use is some Loctite. Now there are various different types of Loctite. 270, by the way, really is a very firm, strong mount. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use 243, which is going to give, it's a medium strength Loctite, and that's just going to hold that bolt in place, but it will still enable the customer at a later date, should he wish to take it out and mount the radar unit underneath that reflector on the back. So this is all we're going to do. So I'm going to take the Loctite, I'm going to place just one small dot of the Loctite on the threads on here, like so. We don't need an awful lot. That's it, that's all we need. And then I'm going to mount the bracket that comes in the kit from INNOVV, like that. in this threaded plastic hole. Now, in the instructions that come from INNOVV, they do tell you that the radar unit can be mounted as low as 40 centimeters, which is well below the number plate, or as high as 130 centimeters. And this position here underneath the rack is approximately 108 centimeters from the floor. Now, the one other thing, and I will move the camera and show you this, is we need to get the pitch angle of the radar unit facing rearwards. So in other words, in simple terms, it can't be parallel, it has actually got to be facing downwards by approximately 10 degrees, plus or minus 2 degrees. And these two screws here do give you some adjustment. We've Loctited this upper bracket in place, and by tomorrow morning that will have gone off. But I think for now, this is where I'm going to leave it. But you have got lots of other locations. You can, if you're happy drilling a hole in the plastics, mount it on the side. You can mount them on the top. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I would probably choose to mount it underneath the reflector by dropping the number plate. It's time to fit the new mirrors, and we've now got our two cables up here, which I'm going to show you what we do with these to get a very neat install in a moment. But first of all, what we need to do is mount the new mirrors. Now, these are very, very easy to do. We just lift the rubber boot off, hold the bar. We're going to use a 14mm spanner, and then we're going to turn anti-clockwise, and then that mirror will rotate very easily off of the handlebars. Now, when it comes to fitting the new mirror, this is the R1300 mirror. The nut is normally supplied right at the end. What we need to do is gently undo that nut until we have approximately 10mm of thread sticking out the bottom. So we want to go back a little bit, something like that, approximately 10mm of thread sticking out the bottom. And also we need to be careful when we're screwing this onto this mount to keep this cable up out the way. We don't want to get it caught. And then we slowly rotate that on there, paying attention to that little cable, making sure it doesn't get trapped and twisted during the mounting process. And then we just rotate the mirror until, there we go, that nut just starts to touch and we know we're fairly close to where we want to be. Now, don't worry about this for the moment. I'm going to show you how we're going to connect this. Now, the mirror itself needs to be almost parallel, in line with the bars. But generally what happens is you just need to be a couple of degrees further back. So I'll line that up parallel, go back just a tiny bit like so, then take my 14mm spanner and then hold the mirror, gently start to do that up like so, and then with a firm grab of the handlebar, firm press of that. So that's now in the right place. So when we mount this, which I'll show in a moment, it's going to go over the top, the boot's going to sit down, and it is going to look very, very good. So repeat the process on the other side. Now we'll move on to what we're going to do with these cables. So inside the additional kit that comes from Weisertechnik, we're going to find this additional shielding cable. Now, this cable, we are going to pass the INNOVV cables through the center of it, and that's going to give us an extra layer of protection and give us a very neat install from the mirrors down through the stock head. Also in the kit are some pieces of heat shrink tubing. I'm going to show you how to use those in a moment. What I'm going to do first, this is a meter. I'm going to cut it in half so that we have two lengths of 50 centimeters. So this part can sometimes be a little bit tricky. I'm going to try and show this on the camera. We gently want to rotate this tubing here backwards and forwards like so, and as we compress it, it actually expands and makes it much easier to slide over the INNOVV cable. And once you've started, it's just a case of doing this little bit at a time like this. I'm grabbing here, I'm pushing upwards, the tube expands to go over the connector, and it doesn't look like we're moving, but we are in fact slowly moving along. So let me just do this all the way through for this cable. I'll do the same for the second side, and then I'll show you what we're going to do with that heat shrink tubing. So once you've placed your outer shielding on both of these cables, this is what it's going to look like. Now, don't worry at this point if you've got some fraying of this PET cabling. Don't worry, we're going to cover that up in a second because we're going to be using the heat shrink tubing to give us a nice, neat, clean finish on this connection. Now, there is one thing to pay attention to. When we use the heat shrink tubing, we're just going to slowly rotate that over the top like so. Pass it all the way past, so it's down here, and then we want to make sure that this shielding is right up to the end and I'll do some close-up pictures for you up to the end of this point here. Now, what is really important is there is a little tiny raised nipple right on the end here, and we do not want to have the heat shrink tubing covering that, because that needs to clip onto the connector on the BMW mirrors. So we actually need to mount it on that first half. So you've got, I would say, about 8mm of the bottom, and if I try and do that and show you, I'm going to bring that up, and that is the position right there where we need to shrink the tubing down. Now, with regards to using a heat gun, that would be my preferred method. You can, of course, use a hairdryer if you don't have one of those, but one thing that is important to do is, because we're going to be putting heat near the front of our motorbike and the fuel tank and the painted areas, I'm going to use a piece of cardboard to offer a bit of extra protection. So now we can see, if we take the cardboard out of the way, we've got our heat shrink tubing giving us a nice clean connection here, a nice firm connection over the connector, and then we can mount this on the mirror in a moment. So I'll do the other side and then we'll move on. So now that we've got our heat shrink tubing and our protective shielding to give an extra layer of protection to the cable mounted and ready, we're on to the last part. Now what we need to do, we need to follow this cable routing, and on this particular bike we've got 1, 2, 3 cable ties that we need to cut and remove. We're going to replace them, and then we're going to take the cable that we've just prepared, and we are going to carefully follow exactly the same routing that in this case, the brake line on this side. On the other side, it's going to be the clutch fluid line, and then we're going to move this up this way towards the mirrors. Now, I've removed the 3 cable ties. Before we start putting the cable ties back, we need to do this connection up here so that we get the length correct. So we've got our cable that we've prepared, we've got the connector, which is part of the R1300 mirrors, and as you can see, there is a nipple on one surface of this connector, so it will only fit one way. So we've got this little cutout in there, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to rotate them. If I turn it over, you'll see both of these 2 points, and if I'm quiet, you'll hear it clip together. Clip. So that connection is now ready. Now what we need to do is make sure that this connection goes over the top, not underneath. And we have these 2 prongs on this side of the BMW connector, and that is going to clip into a little space on the inside there. So I'm just going to rotate that over the top of the bar like so, and then if I'm quiet, you might just hear that clip into place. If I'm quiet now, clip. So if I rotate the bar a little bit, so now we've got our BMW connector with our INNOVV cables connected underneath there. We've done up firmly our 14mm nut. There is a little rubber boot that sits on top of this nut up here. You can check that that's tight if you like, which I have done, and then just rotate that back into place. And then all we need to do is we need to rotate the boot over this assembly. So I'm just gently going to wiggle that over the top like so. I'm going to hold that with my finger and then gently slide that boot over there. So that's done in terms of the connection. So then all I need to do now is I can now carefully retrace my steps underneath here, and I'll move the camera and show you where we're going to put the cable ties. So I removed 3 cable ties from the BMW system, and I've refitted 5 to hold that cable exactly in the right place. So I've got an additional one at the top. This is one of the original ones. This one here is the original one. This one here is the original position, and then one additional one down the bottom here where it clips onto the brake fluid line. So these 2 here are additional. So now we're ready. I can cut those off, and all we need to do now is repeat the same process on the other side. So now we're almost finished. We've done our connections to our mirrors. We've mounted our BMW mirrors. A couple of things to highlight. Now, before you refit the 4 sections that we removed for this installation, the 2 sections on the rear and these 2 side panels, I would suggest you just take a couple of minutes just to recheck your work. Start at the rear of the bike, make sure you've got the angle of that radar, you set it vertically, and then you tilt it down at a pitch of 10 degrees. This is all explained in the instructions. It's very easy to do with the screws that you can adjust. And then just follow the system along from the rear to the front, making sure those cables are neat, tidy and secure. You can use cable ties and cloth tape, and in particular when you're coming up to the side of the fuel tank, make sure those cables don't rub or foul on any of those panels. Now, as you've seen, the installation is really easy. I think most people, if you've never done anything like this whatsoever, and you don't even do your own motorbike servicing, I think if you're that type of owner, this will take your time. 2 hours is more than enough to complete the install. But for those of us that do our own servicing, and we do maintenance, and we've changed oil and filter and changed the air filter on our bikes, this is really very easy, and I can't see anyone really taking much more than an hour. We've got 2 sections on the rear, 2 sections on the front, a little bit of connections to do, some cable ties and some routing. It is very easy to do, and then you're going to have a great system. Now, before we fit those panels, we're going to do a self-test. Now, the INNOVV system has an inbuilt self-check, which it does when you start the system up. I'll turn the ignition on and show you what it is, and I'll be quiet. But in essence, you're listening for a single beep, which tells you the self-test is starting, and then both of these warning triangles in these mirrors will flash 3 times to confirm the self-test has been completed and you're fine to get going. So let me turn the ignition on and then you can have a look. So I'll be quiet. So once it's done that, once you've seen those 3 flashes, you're ready and you can get going. So I'm going to get changed, go out on the road, and I'll show you what it's like now it's been installed. We're getting rear collision warning. So what that means is when vehicles are fast approaching from behind, both of these LEDs will flash and warn us that there is a vehicle approaching fast from behind. So that's one system. And then of course we've got our blind spot detection system. So for vehicles passing down the side of the motorbike, the indicator or that LED in this mirror is going to illuminate to let us know what's going on. And I think for the cost of this system, it's an easy decision. So I hope that this video has achieved 2 things. It's made you aware just how easy and simple it is to install a system like this on our older generation motorbikes, and importantly, the benefits that this sort of technology that is starting to appear as standard equipment on our modern motorbikes in 24 and 25 and beyond, and how we can take that technology from these companies and add it to our older generation bikes. So in the video description below, you're going to find links to where you can buy the products. Just be aware that the full kit, which includes the mirrors and the additional installation kit, is only available from Weisertechnik. Now, Weisertechnik are an English-American company. They've got facilities in the US and they've got facilities in the UK where they do their design and their manufacturing. There are 2 different websites where you can order the kits, and it comes with pretty much everything you need. Now, on this older generation bike, I have had to use a few additional cable ties and some cloth tape and a ring terminal, but I think really every bike is going to be different. And if you have got time, do watch that other video, because I do show you in the original video, which I'll put a link to. I'll put just one video at the end of this one, and that shows you how you can just buy a simple bolt and do a test on your handlebars to see whether you can fit this kit and these mirrors to your other BMW motorbikes. There's F series, there are R series, there's a whole range of bikes you can fit them to. So I have had a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing the customer when he collects his bike. I've still got a few more weeks. I still got some more products to install for him. But I think this is one bit of technology he is really going to appreciate. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Everything you need is in the video description below. All the links are there. See you soon. Bye-bye.